She arrived at his ball in riding clothes. He said if she couldn't dress like a duchess, she shouldn't come at all. She outranked him. She knew it. He knew it. And somehow that's not even close to what this story is really about. The ball at Ashwick Manor had been arranged with the particular care that small counties reserve for events that matter. The Merivale family had spent 3 weeks on the guest list alone, and the flowers in the entrance hall had been ordered from as far as Bath. Everyone who was anyone in 3 parishes would attend. Everyone who attended would remember. It was the sort of evening the housekeeper had confided to the footman, on which reputations were made or quietly buried. At 8:15, the Countess of Ashford arrived on horseback. Not in a carriage, which would have been appropriate, not with a maid in attendance, which would have been sensible. She arrived alone, in a deep green riding habit that had seen better seasons, her dark hair pinned with the efficiency of a woman who had done it herself, her riding gloves still on, and an expression of perfect composure that suggested she found nothing unusual in the arrangement. The groom who came to take her horse looked as though he had several questions. He asked none of them. Inside, the ballroom was warm with candlelight and the low hum of assembled county society. Mrs. Merivale had been receiving guests for 40 minutes without incident when the housekeeper's voice cut through the anteroom. The Countess of Ashford. Leonora walked in. The room did not stop. Rooms in Regency England did not stop, that was not how things were done. But there was a quality of attention that shifted, like a congregation recognizing an unexpected text. Fans slowed. Conversations reached their natural breaks and did not resume. Eyes moved with the discretion of people pretending not to look. She was 31, and she wore it as a settled fact. The riding habit was well cut, even if it was not a ball gown. Her posture was the posture of a woman who had stood in rooms like this since childhood and found them manageable. She greeted Mrs. Merivale with genuine warmth, explained briefly. Her carriage had thrown a wheel 2 miles out. She had made a decision and accepted a glass of wine which she held without drinking, her riding gloves remaining on her hands with the deliberateness of a statement. "You came on horseback," said Mrs. Merivale, who was working very hard to remain gracious. "I did." Leonora looked about the room with calm interest. It seemed preferable to standing in a ditch. Mrs. Merivale laughed despite herself, then caught herself laughing, and the effort of the recovery was visible to anyone paying attention. Several people were paying attention. Across the ballroom, near the windows that overlooked the darkened garden, Alistair Vane, Duke of Crestmore, had been in conversation with Sir Robert Finch for 11 minutes about drainage. He was tolerating it with the patience he applied to most of his evenings, attentive, correct, present in the technical sense of the word. He noticed the shift in the room before he located its cause. He turned. The woman in the riding habit stood at the center of Mrs. Merivale's careful composure, holding a glass of wine in gloved hands, saying something that made one of the Merivale daughters press her lips together in suppressed amusement. She had not looked in his direction. She appeared entirely unaware that anyone was looking in hers, which he recognized from long experience as a performance of considerable skill. Sir Robert said something about clay soil. Said Alistair. He knew who she was. Everyone in the county knew who she was. The Countess of Ashford had held her title for 6 years since her father's death. The earldom had been granted in the previous century under letters patent specifying heirs general, unusual for an English title and a point of some legal interest among those who followed such things. It meant the title passed to Leonora by law, not preference. She had managed the estate herself since, declined 3 offers of marriage, and possessed a reputation that depended entirely on who was speaking. Her supporters called her capable and refreshingly direct. Her detractors called her proud and, in lower voices, peculiar. He had met her twice, once at a christening 4 years ago, where they had exchanged perhaps 8 words. Once at a county meeting the previous spring, where she had disagreed with the magistrate's assessment of road repair costs in terms that were precise, informed and entirely correct, and had done so without raising her voice. He was a duke. She was a countess. In the order of things, the precedence was clear. His rank was the higher, and the world arranged itself accordingly. But rank and authority were not the same instrument, and he understood, watching her hold a wine glass in riding gloves in the middle of a formal ball, that the Countess of Ashford had a specific relationship with the world's arrangements. She was talking to the younger Merivale daughter now, Charlotte, who was looking at the riding habit with undisguised admiration. Leonora said something. Charlotte laughed. The elder daughter, more circumspect, glanced toward Alistair and then quickly away. He excused himself from Finch and crossed the room. He stopped his route twice. A word with the vicar. A nod to old Mr. Hartley, who was partially deaf and grateful for the acknowledgement. By the time he reached the small circle that had formed around the Countess of Ashford, his arrival was natural, unremarkable. "Lady Ashford," he said. She turned. Her eyes were grey, and they settled on him with the quality of someone who had been expecting him for some time. "Your Grace," she said. Up close, the riding habit was even more deliberate. It had clearly been made by someone who understood their work. The gloves, still on, were the particular detail. Every woman in the room had removed her gloves. It was what one did. Leonora had not. The gloves were butter-soft leather, the kind made for a rider, and they had held reins this evening, and they were on her hands at a ball, and she knew it, and she did not appear troubled by the knowledge. "I understand your carriage met with difficulty," he said. "A wheel, yes." Her tone was pleasant. "I'm told it's being seen to. I am glad to hear it." He let a moment pass. "I hope your arrival hasn't caused the Merivales undue distress." A slight pause, the first one barely perceptible. "I have apologized to Mrs. Merivale," she said. "She has been very gracious." "She has," he agreed. "She is a gracious woman." It was said without inflection. It carried a great deal. Leonora looked at him with steady grey eyes. "You feel I ought not to have come?" "I feel," he said carefully, "that you have placed Mrs. Merivale in a position she did not expect. I have explained the carriage." "You have," he met her gaze. "A carriage wheel is a fact. What to do about it is a choice." Charlotte Merivale had gone very still beside them. Leonora said nothing for a moment. Then, "You are quite right, Your Grace, it was a choice." She looked at him without flinching. "I chose to attend an invitation I had accepted, rather than send a note of regret from a roadside. I judged that the obligation to the Merivales outweighed the inconvenience to their sensibilities." A pause. "I may have judged incorrectly." He said nothing. "But I am here now," she added, with a pleasantness that was doing considerable work, "and I intend to behave very well for the remainder of the evening. I hope that will serve." She turned back to Charlotte Merivale with the ease of a woman who has concluded a subject. Alistair returned to the edge of the room. He accepted wine from a passing footman and stood with it untouched. The evening was going to be longer than he had planned. The music began at 9. The first two sets went as they always did, the Merivale girls with partners their mother had selected, the married couples performing their annual demonstration of continuity, the young men from further afield making their assessments with the focus of people conducting business. Leonora danced once with Mr. Hartley's son, who was earnest and slightly too tall, and once with a man from Wiltshire whose name Alistair did not catch. She danced well. She did not look toward where he stood. He was not watching her. He spoke with 4 people in the course of an hour. He agreed to look at Finch's drainage problem on Thursday. He promised Mrs. Merivale the name of the architect who had done the work on his east wing. He was performing, by any measure, the function of a man at a country ball. At 10:30, the music paused for refreshment and the room reorganized into smaller conversations. He found himself, by a movement he chose not to examine, near the doorway to the garden terrace. Leonora was already there, standing just outside in the cooler air, not far, only enough to breathe. She had removed one glove. She held it in her ungloved hand, looking out at the dark garden, not drinking, not doing anything but standing in the night air with one bare hand and one gloved one. "Lady Ashford," he said. She did not startle. "Your Grace." She looked at the glove rather than at him. "I find I need air at these events in small increments. As do most people. Most people do it less visibly." She glanced at him. "You disapprove of visibility." "I have no opinion about it." "That," she said, "is not true." He was quiet. The garden smelled of late summer, grass and something faintly floral from a bed he couldn't see. Inside, a fiddle was being tuned, with the optimism of a man who believed the second set would improve on the first. "You are still wearing one glove," he said. "I couldn't decide." She looked at it. "Whether to take both off or put it back on. That is not a quality I would have attributed to you." A pause, then careful. "No, I don't suppose it is." She put the glove back on. Both hands gloved again, she turned to go inside. He stepped aside. She was close enough that he could see the pin at her collar. Silver, small, shaped like a wing in flight, old. Something kept. She went back into the ballroom. He remained in the doorway another minute. The second set was beginning. Somewhere in the warm room, Leonora was moving among the guests with the ease of a woman who had never been unsettled at all. He did not believe that. He wasn't sure why it mattered that he didn't. The remark was made at supper, not loudly. Alistair had said it to Sir Robert Finch, quietly, while they stood at the edge of the supper table, that it would have been a courtesy to the hosts to send word she'd be arriving as she was. Not a cutting remark, not even wrong, the sort of observation one makes and forgets. Mrs. Peel, who was 58 and positioned closer to them than he had realized, heard it. Mrs. Peel told Lady Dowell. Lady Dowell, for whom information was currency, spent it promptly on Mrs. Hartley, who was standing close enough to Charlotte Merivale that it required no further travel. Charlotte waited until she was beside Leonora at the refreshment table. "Lady Ashford," she said, low and careful, "I think you should know—" "I know," Leonora said. Charlotte blinked. "It reached me 4 minutes ago." Leonora picked up a small cake, considered it and set it down. Her gloves were off now, both of them, tucked into her pocket, and she ate the cake with the decision of a woman who has made peace with the evening. "It's of no consequence." "Your expression—" "Is perfectly composed," a slight smile. "Thank you for your concern." She turned to find Alistair 6 feet away. He had heard enough. She could see that in the set of his jaw, not guilt exactly, but the recognition of a man who has made a clean, small error and is now looking at its shape. The room had not stopped. No one was staring, but the quality of awareness had returned. Leonora held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked down at the gloves in her pocket, both off finally, the statement concluded, and back up at him. "Your Grace," she said. "Lady Ashford," his voice was level. "I believe I owe the Merivales a 4th dance," she said. "Excuse me." She walked away. The green of the riding habit moved through the crowd like something that had always belonged there, and required no one's permission to say so. He watched her go. Sir Robert appeared at his elbow. "Damnable business," he said. "Don't," said Alistair. Sir Robert did not. She was his neighbour. This was a fact he had always known and never particularly attended to, the way one knows the names of constellations without often thinking to look up. Ashford Park was 4 miles from Crestmer, nothing in the country. A morning ride, a distance measured not in time but in how often one chose to cover it. The morning after the ball he rode out to Finch's eastern fields and spent 2 hours on drainage. The morning after that, correspondence and a meeting with his steward. On the 3rd morning he had no appointments and no particular purpose, and he found himself without conscious decision riding east. He told himself it was to look at the Ashford boundary wall, which he had heard was in poor repair and which, if it fell, would become a question of easement. The wall was in excellent repair. He was examining it with the focused attention of a man who has run out of excuses when he heard hoofbeats on the rise behind him. Leonora came over at a canter, slowed when she saw him, and stopped her horse at a distance that was polite but not warm. "Your Grace." A pause in which she looked at the wall, then at him. "Inspecting the boundary?" "I had heard it was in disrepair." "From whom?" He had no answer. She waited without apparent malice while he failed to produce one. "The wall is mine," she said, "and it is sound, but thank you for the concern." She was in a different riding habit today, deeper blue and gloves, always gloves on horseback. She sat her horse the way people do when they have ridden, since before they could think about it, without effort, without display. He fell into step beside her before he decided to. They rode along the boundary in silence that was not entirely comfortable, and not entirely not. "I owe you an apology," he said. She glanced at him. "Do you?" "What I said to Finch was heard by Mrs. Peel and distributed accordingly." She kept her eyes forward. "Yes, I'm aware. It was not intended to reach you." "I know." A pause, which is not quite the same as an apology. He recognized this as correct. "You are right, I'm sorry, what I said was ungenerous." She considered this. "It was not entirely wrong," she said. "I might have sent word. I chose not to, partly because the decision was made quickly and partly because—" She paused. "I am not accustomed to giving account of myself." "Nor am I accustomed to expecting it," he said, "in your case." She looked at him then, direct, assessing. He met it without flinching. "That," she said, "is almost gracious." "Almost," he agreed. They had reached a gate in the wall, hers with the Ashford crest in old iron. She drew her horse up. "I ride this way most mornings," she said. "Information, not invitation." "I ride east sometimes," he said. "Yes?" She looked at him once more. "So I have observed." She opened the gate and went through it without looking back. He sat on his side of the wall. Then he turned toward home. The second encounter happened 2 days later, at the lending library in Merton. Less a library than a well-stocked back room at the bookseller's, kept by the voluntary contributions of the neighbourhood's more literary households. Alistair had come for a volume of agricultural essays. Leonora was already there. She stood at the shelves with the absorbed attention of a woman who had arrived with a purpose and found more than she expected. A book, open in one hand, a second tucked under her arm, comparing something between them with the quiet focus of a woman who had entirely forgotten she was in a public space. The bookseller, Mr. Potts, looked between them with the hopeful expression of a man who liked things to go well. "The Countess arrived just before you, Your Grace. The agricultural essays are on the far shelf. I'll fetch them directly." "No hurry," said Alistair. He moved to the shelves without particular direction. Leonora was at natural history. He was, by the room's geography, in the vicinity of political economy. "You read Gilpin," he said. She glanced up. "I do, and you?" "Once, some years ago." He looked at the volume under her arm. "And the other?" "A geological survey of the northern counties. I'm considering whether the methods might apply to Ashford's lower fields. There's an odd drainage pattern I suspect is bedrock-related." He looked at her a moment. "You're studying the geology yourself?" "I'm reading about geology," she corrected. "Whether that constitutes study depends on what I do with it afterward." She closed Gilpin. "My steward thinks I should simply hire someone. I think I should understand the problem first." "Your steward is right," he said, "and so are you." She blinked, a small unguarded thing. "That is an unusual position." "Not really. You can hire someone without understanding the principle. The principle tells you whether the work was done well." He considered. "The drainage in your lower fields, is it scattered or concentrated?" She looked at him with the slight wariness of a woman not certain whether she is being helped or managed. He kept his expression neutral and waited. "Concentrated," she said. "The eastern third. After heavy rain, it stands 4 or 5 days before clearing. Clay subsoil. It holds water. Finch had a similar pattern 3 years ago. French drains resolved it. Gravel-filled trenches cut to depth." "I know what a French drain is." "Yes," he said. "I assumed you did." A short pause. "Thank you," she said, with the precision of a woman choosing a word carefully. "Of course," he said. Mr. Potts returned with the agricultural essays. The transaction concluded in the ordinary way. Alistair left first, and at the door, turned without thinking. She was already looking back at the shelves, both books under her arm, the geological survey and Gilpin side by side. He went out into the morning. The third encounter was not accidental. He had ridden east and then past the boundary wall and knocked at the door of Ashford Park with the stated purpose of inquiring whether Lady Ashford would benefit from an introduction to Finch's drainage man. A reasonable purpose, a thin one. The housekeeper showed him to a sitting room that was not the formal drawing room, smaller, south-facing, with a desk that held genuine evidence of use, papers, an inkstand, 2 estate ledgers open side by side, a pair of folded reading glasses at the edge. The room felt inhabited in a way that surprised him. Nothing at Crestmore looked like this. Nothing at Crestmore had been touched without intending to be seen. He noted the reading glasses and said nothing about them. Leonora came in 5 minutes later, making the small adjustment of her sleeves that meant she had been working and had switched modes. Her hair was pinned more loosely than at the ball. She did not look discomposed. She looked like herself, which he was beginning to understand was a specific and distinct quality. "Your Grace," she did not seem surprised. "Please sit." "I'll stand, thank you." He was already standing. "I came about the drainage. Finch's man is a fellow called Grimshaw, a yard in Merton. I thought you might want the introduction." "That is kind." "It's practical." "Yes," a pause. "Both things can be true." He handed her the card he'd written that morning. She read it and set it beside the reading glasses. "Will you sit?" she said again. "Since you've ridden 4 miles." He sat. She sat across from him, hands folded in no particular hurry. The south windows let in late morning light at an angle that caught the wingpin at her collar, a bird in flight, stylized, old silver. "Are your father's?" he said before he could stop himself. Her hand went to it, brief, unconscious. Yes, he had it made for my mother. She left it to me. He said nothing. He was particular about many things, she said, but he ensured the title would pass through the letters patent as written, heirs general, the original grant specified. She looked at the window. He was proud of that clause. He said a person's capability mattered more than their birth order. He was... Something quiet entered her voice, occasionally right about things. He managed the estate well? He managed it adequately. I manage it better. She said this without arrogance, only as a statement of observable fact. Without your steward? With one. Mr. Calloway manages what he's given to manage. I retain the decisions. She looked at him steadily. Is that something you find troubling? A pause. No. Good. She glanced at the ledgers. Then you won't object that I have a meeting with Calloway in an hour? He stood. Of course. He picked up his gloves. I'll write to Grimshaw, introduce you by letter. Please. She walked him to the sitting-room door herself rather than ringing for the housekeeper. At the threshold she stopped. He stopped. Lady Ashford, he said. Your Grace, she said. He left. He rode home thinking about the reading glasses on the desk, the wing-shaped pin, the quality of the light in that room at 11 in the morning. He wrote to Grimshaw that afternoon. The village of Merton held its autumn fair in the 3rd week of September, a tradition old enough to have survived a French war and several changes of government. There were stalls, a livestock judging, and a tent serving something that called itself cider and was more interesting than that. Alistair attended because it was expected. Several of his tenants exhibited animals, and he owed them the acknowledgement. Leonora attended for her own reasons, which she had not shared with anyone. He found her at the livestock judging, standing beside old Hartley, and engaged in serious discussion of a large brown cow exhibited by one of the Ashford tenant farmers, a young man, recently married, talking about the animal's yield with genuine enthusiasm. Alistair stopped at a slight remove. Leonora noticed him. She always noticed him, he had come to understand. She simply chose the moment of acknowledgement. Your Grace. She glanced at the cow. Mr. Fellows's best milker has produced consistently across 3 seasons on nothing but the lower meadow grass. I've been arguing with Calloway that the eastern pasture isn't worth the fencing cost. This rather proves the point. Grass quality in the lower meadow is unusual in this county, he said because it was true. The soil retention. Exactly. Something that was almost warmth crossed her face. Calloway doesn't believe me. Write it down. 3 seasons of yield data is an argument he can't dismiss. She looked at him a moment. Yes, she said, it is. They walked the fair after that, not deliberately, but by the gradual accumulation of shared direction. The other animals, brief words with the same people, cider from the tent in the pale September sun. He had not been comfortable in public company in some time. Correct? Yes, always correct. But comfort was different, and he was aware that this was something close to it. Lady Dowell is watching us, Leonora said without alarm. He looked. Lady Dowell was at the opposite edge of the fairground, ostensibly examining autumn vegetables. She always is, he said. She was at the ball. She is at everything. A pause. What will she say? Leonora's voice was even. That we spoke, that we walked about, he considered. Whatever she makes of it. She will make something of it. She took a sip of cider. She made something of my riding clothes. She will. He looked at nothing in particular. Does that concern you? A pause longer than the others. He didn't look at her. Yes, she said, it does. Because? Because I have worked carefully, she said, her voice still even, to maintain a reputation that allows me to live as I choose. I hold my title alone. I manage my estate alone. I make my decisions alone. Any suggestion that that there is a... She stopped. Yes, he said, I see. She looked at him. He looked at her. Between them was the specific silence of 2 people who have arrived at the edge of something and are not yet sure whether to step back. Lady Dowell, he said, will say what she says. She has been saying things about me for 7 years. I know what she says about you, Leonora said. He was quiet. I know, she continued, measured, what they say generally, that you are difficult, exacting, that your first marriage was... She stopped. Unhappy, he said. You may say it. She looked at him. Was she right about you, your wife? He said nothing for a moment. In some respects. And in others? In others, she chose to make her argument publicly, which— He stopped. It was a long time ago. 7 years, she said. He glanced at her. You've counted. I've heard the story. Most of the county has. She looked at him squarely. And you still care about how things are done, how one ought to appear? Apparently, he said. She nodded slowly, then, I find that I don't think less of you for it, which surprises me. He turned to look at her. She was watching the fairground with her composed grey eyes, cider in hand, both gloves on, not looking at him. Lady Ashford, he said. He had been about to say something. He was no longer certain what. Nothing, he said. Nothing, she agreed. They walked back toward the village, a few feet of September air between them, Lady Dowell's eyes on their backs, neither of them speaking. The silence as full as any conversation he'd had in years. October arrived with the decisiveness of an English autumn that has been waiting long enough. The leaves turned in a single week. The mornings grew short. Leonora did not see Alistair for 9 days. She was aware of this with a precision that annoyed her. She knew the number because she had not been counting, and the fact that she could produce it without effort told her something she would rather not have known. She had been occupied. The drainage work had begun. Grimshaw was competent as promised, and the trenching in the eastern field had started in the first dry week. The estate accounts needed attention. She had written 3 letters to her solicitor in London about a field boundary dispute on the western edge, a matter running since her father's time, showing every sign of outlasting hers. She had been entirely occupied. She went for her morning rides, and the boundary wall was simply a wall. There was nothing on the other side of it she was looking for. On the 10th day, she was in the library cross-referencing 2 maps with the surveyor's notes from 1804, when Mrs. Baines knocked. Mr. Calloway is here about the harvest accounts, my lady, and— A pause deployed with the precision of a woman who had been in service 40 years. There is also a letter, hand-delivered this morning. Leave the letter and send Calloway in. The letter sat at the corner of the desk through the entire meeting, which lasted 40 minutes and covered harvest yields, the trenching costs, and an argument about whether to sell the October wool early or hold it. She won the argument by producing 3 years of price records from a small notebook, a practice Calloway had initially found eccentric and had since stopped challenging. When he left, she picked up the letter. The handwriting was plain and precise, a man's hand educated without flourish. The seal was a crest she recognized. She opened it. Lady Ashford. Grimshaw tells me the trenching is progressing well. I hope the eastern field causes you less trouble hereafter. I am writing also to say the Merivales are hosting a small dinner on the 15th. I expect you have also been invited. If the occasion is not disagreeable to you, I thought perhaps we might, that is, if the evening allows for it. There is a matter I have been— Forgive me, I will say it plainly. I have found our recent conversations to be of more value than I expected. I hope that is not an unwelcome observation. Yours, Anctre. Crestmore. She read it twice, then set it face down and looked at the estate map for a long moment. He had started 3 sentences and finished none of them. Alistair Vane, Duke of Crestmere, who was correct in all things and gave no quarter in matters of propriety, had written her a letter with 3 unfinished sentences and then apologized for them. She turned it over and read it a 3rd time. She put it in the drawer with the estate papers. She wrote back the same afternoon, Your Grace. The eastern field is much improved. Please convey my thanks to Grimshaw. I have indeed been invited to the Merivales on the 15th. The occasion is not disagreeable. Your observation is not unwelcome. Ashford. She sealed it and gave it to the footman before she could revise it. The Merivale dinner was 14 people, larger than intimate, smaller than formal, arranged with the social geometry Mrs. Merivale considered her particular skill. She placed Leonora between old Mr. Hartley and a gentleman from Somerset called Whitmore, visiting his cousin pleasant and unremarkable. She placed Alistair at the other end of the table. Whether by strategy or accident, Leonora could not determine. What she could determine was that it made conversation between them impossible and proximity irrelevant. 14 people, a table set with flowers and candelabra, enough to interrupt any direct line of sight across its length. The ordinary architecture of a formal dinner designed to manage exactly this. She ate her fish. She answered Whitmore's questions about the coast. She gave old Mr. Hartley more of her attention than strictly necessary, which he appreciated visibly. She did not watch the other end of the table. After dinner, the party divided in the customary way and reassembled in the drawing-room with the slight disorder that the end of a meal produces. She found herself near the fireplace with Charlotte Merivale and tea that was hotter than she wanted. Charlotte said very quietly, "He asked after you at dinner to Mrs. Carlyle." Leonora looked at her. "She told me afterward. He asked whether she had met you before, whether she found you." Charlotte paused, being as she had expected. "And what did Mrs. Carlyle say?" "That she had not, but that she considered that a point in your favor." Leonora held her teacup. "Charlotte," she said with the gentle finality of a woman declining further intelligence. "Thank you." Alistair crossed the room. He stopped beside her with the directness of a man who has chosen his destination and sees no reason to disguise it. "Lady Ashford." He accepted tea from a passing tray. He did not look at Charlotte's retreating form. He looked at Leonora. "I received your letter." "Yes." "You are concise." "I was raised to be." He held his tea without drinking it. "I was not concise." "No." "I found it," a pause, "uncharacteristic." "I noticed." He looked at the fire. The room had the warmth of after-dinner company, voices at a comfortable pitch, the sense of an evening winding down without urgency. They stood slightly apart from the general arrangement, not conspicuously. "Enough." "Lady Dowell," he said. She glanced across the room. Lady Dowell was in animated conversation with Mrs. Carlyle, but her attention, as always, was distributed. "She is never entirely occupied," Leonora said. "No." A pause. "Does it trouble you that she sees us speaking?" "It would trouble me less," she said carefully, "if I knew what she was seeing." He set his teacup on the mantelpiece. "I'm not good at this." "No," she said, "you are not." He looked at her with something that was almost wry. "That is not comforting." "I didn't intend it as comfort." She looked at the fire. "I find I prefer you when you are not being good at things. It is more—" She searched for the word, "navigable." "Navigable," he repeated. "When you are correct and composed, I know what to do with you." She did not look at him. "When you write a letter with 3 unfinished sentences, I find I am somewhat at a loss." The fire settled. Someone across the room said something that made 2 other people laugh. "Lady Ashford," he said. She looked at him. He had said her title with something in it. Not the formal address, not the social reflex, but the beginning of a different register. He had started, and he had stopped, and what remained was her title in his voice, with a quality she did not know what to do with. "Yes?" she said. He picked up his teacup. "I am glad the field is improved." She held his gaze a moment. "Thank you," she said, "for Grimshaw." They stood there another minute in the warmth of the Merivales' drawing-room, the evening going on around them with its ordinary competence. Lady Dowell was looking at them. She was always looking. Leonora was aware of it, and aware that she did not, in this precise moment, care in the way she had told herself she did. This was new information. She filed it without looking at it directly. "I should speak to old Mr. Hartley," she said. "He was kind at dinner." "Of course." Alistair stepped aside. "Then the Merivales are having people for the shooting next weekend. I don't suppose—" He stopped. She turned. He looked as though he had surprised himself. "I will be there," she said. "Yes," he said. "Good." She crossed the room to where Mr. Hartley sat with his tea and his comfortable deafness. She did not look back. She already knew he was watching. The week between the dinner and the shooting party was the week everything shifted, in the small accumulative way of things that have been building longer than anyone has admitted. It began with Lady Dowell. Lady Dowell spoke to Mrs. Partridge, wife of the county magistrate and a woman of considerable social influence, and what she said, offered as concern, stated as observation, was that she had noticed the Duke of Crestmar and the Countess of Ashford in one another's company a great deal, and that she wondered whether the Countess, a woman managing alone without family counsel, quite understood what she was doing. "He is very compelling," Lady Dowell said, "as men of that sort are." "What sort?" said Mrs. Partridge. "Difficult men." A pause. "His first wife, you know." Mrs. Partridge was a fair-minded woman. She heard this, considered it, and repeated some portion of it to her sister. Her sister was less fair-minded, and repeated rather more to her neighbour, and by Thursday, what had begun as a murmured wondering had become a settled version of a story. The Countess of Ashford was allowing herself to be drawn in by the Duke, which was either foolish or calculated, depending on who you asked. Neither version was complimentary. Leonora heard it Friday from Charlotte Merivale, who came with the faithful urgency of a young woman who believes information is a form of love. "It's not fair," Charlotte said. "You've done nothing, he's done nothing, you've only talked—" "Charlotte." Charlotte stopped. Leonora was sitting in the south-facing room, hands folded, quite still. "What precisely are they saying?" she asked. Charlotte told her, precisely because Leonora had asked. Leonora listened without interrupting. When Charlotte finished, she unfolded her hands and folded them differently. "And the Duke," she said, "is there a version about him?" "That he is—" Charlotte hesitated. "That he pursues you deliberately, that after his first marriage he may not, that he prefers—" She stopped entirely. "That he would not intend marriage," Leonora said. "Yes." The room was quiet. This was the thing Leonora had not permitted herself to look at. She looked at it now. She looked at the fact that she had been in this man's company repeatedly, voluntarily, with pleasure, and had been seen in it, and had known she was being seen, and had proceeded. She looked at what that meant for her reputation, for the independence she had described to him herself, for the quiet authority she had spent 6 years building from a title and an estate, and her own particular stubbornness. She looked at the drawer where the letter was. "Thank you," she said to Charlotte, "for telling me." Charlotte looked at her with the anxious sincerity of 22. "What will you do?" "I will attend the Merivale's shooting party tomorrow," Leonora said, "and conduct myself as I always have." "And the Duke?" "Will conduct himself as he chooses." A pause. "As he always has." Charlotte left. The house settled. Leonora sat at the desk without working. She thought about the letter and its 3 unfinished sentences. She thought about her reputation, which was real and earned and fragile in the way that women's reputations were fragile, not from scandal, but from the implication of weakness. She thought about the fair and the cider, and the 9 days she had counted without counting. She opened the drawer. She read the letter once more, put it back. She went to bed and did not sleep well, and was on her horse by 7 the following morning, which was what she did when she needed to think. She rode east. She told herself she did not notice when she reached the boundary wall. She noticed. She turned south. The shooting party was 18 people, too many for intimacy, too few for anonymity. The morning was cold and bright, the kind of October day that looks like a painting of itself. The men went out. The 2 women who shot, including Leonora, taught by her father, seeing no reason to pretend otherwise, went with them. Alistair shot well. She had expected this. He did most things correctly. She shot better. She knew this because she could count, and because the particular quiet that followed her 3rd consecutive clean shot was the quiet of people revising an expectation. "Well?" said Sir Robert Finch, who stood beside Alistair with the diplomatic reserve of a man who can see several things happening at once. "Indeed," said Alistair. He looked at her across the field with an expression she couldn't entirely read, not displeasure, not quite surprise. Something in its own category. She looked back and said nothing. The morning wore on. The party moved from field to field. She and Alistair did not speak. The geometry of a shooting party moved people differently than a drawing room, but she was aware of his position, and she was aware that he was aware of hers. At midday they returned to the house for luncheon. It was in the interval between field and house, that unsettled moment when a group redistributes from one context to another, that Mrs. Carlyle appeared at Leonora's elbow. Mrs. Carlyle was perhaps 35, handsome, with the easy confidence of a woman who had navigated the world on her own terms. She walked beside Leonora a moment in silence. "You are the Countess of Ashford," she said pleasantly. "I am." "I thought so. I had heard about you." A pause. "At dinner the Duke mentioned your field drainage." "Did he?" Gade struck me as a man thinking about someone and having only one vocabulary available to him, a small warm smile. I wondered if it was obvious from your side as well. Leonora said nothing. Mrs. Carlyle smiled again and fell back to speak with someone else. Leonora walked the last 50 yards to the house alone. In the mirror of the entrance hall she caught her own face, composed, cool, classical, exactly as it always was. The silver wing pin at her collar, her gloves in her hand. She had taken them off to shoot and had not put them back on. She looked at herself for a moment. Then she went in to luncheon. The afternoon gave the party its customary liberty. Some to the billiard room, some to the drawing room, some to the garden, while the cold held off. Leonora chose the library. It was better than she'd expected of the Merivales, a real collection, well used. She found a chair by the window and sat with a volume she did not read. The garden was visible through the glass, the bare formality of it, the paths between beds, the last of the autumn roses stubbornly present in one corner. She heard the door. She knew it was him before she looked up. She couldn't have said how. Alistair came in, checked slightly when he saw her, and came the rest of the way in. "I didn't know you were here," he said. "I know," she said. He looked at the shelves. He did not go to them. He took a chair on the other side of the window, and they were each in their own pool of pale October light, the garden between them beyond the glass. "You shoot very well," he said. "My father taught me." "He taught you to outshoot a field of 12? "He taught me to shoot accurately. Accuracy is comparative by nature." I pause. He looked at the window. His face in the afternoon light was the face she was beginning to know better than she had intended, the set of it, the discipline, and beneath that, the other thing. "Your father," he said. "Was the house quiet after he died?" She set the book down. "Yes." "Mine was loud," he said. "After my father died, my mother—" He stopped. "It doesn't matter." "It seems to." He looked at her then. The library was still. Elsewhere in the house came the muffled sounds of other people's sociability, a burst of laughter, a door. In here it was only the two of them, and the grey October garden, and the light that would not last another hour. "I have heard," he said carefully, "what is being said." She was still. "About the nature of— about us," he paused. "I want you to know it was not my intention to cause you difficulty." "I know that," she said. "Your reputation is mine to manage." Her voice was even. "I appreciate your concern." "It is not only concern." He met her eyes. "I am aware that I have another stop, the same quality as the letter, a man arriving at the edge of something and finding the vocabulary insufficient." "Alistair," she said. He looked at her. She had used his name. She had not planned to. She did not regret it. "What are you trying to say?" she asked. The light in the window was thinning. The last roses in the garden corner were still there, improbably. He looked at her with the look she had no name for yet, and she looked back. "I don't know how to do this," he said, "without damaging something." "Which something?" "Your standing, my own," a pause, "particular history of damaging things." "Your first wife," she said. "Yes." "She was not wrong about you." She held his gaze. "And she was not right about you. Both things are true. I think you know that, and are using one to cancel the other, which is, if you will forgive me, not productive." A silence. "How long have you been thinking about this?" he said. "Since the letter," she said, "with the 3 unfinished sentences." He almost smiled. "Not quite. They were not my best work. They were your most honest." She looked at him steadily. "Which is why I kept the letter." The light was nearly gone. Somewhere in the house people were assembling for tea. Alistair stood. She stood. They were not far apart. She could see the silver buttons on his coat, the careful set of his jaw that was not coldness, but the daily management of not being cold. "Lady Ashford," he said. The formal address. She felt the distance of it, which was new. She had not before this afternoon known what his mode of addressing her could cost. "Yes," she said. "I think I need to consider what I am doing." "Yes," she said. "So do I." He left the library. She sat back down and looked at the garden for a long time, the light going, the roses still there in the corner where they had no business being in October, stubbornly, improbably, as if someone had forgotten to tell them the season was over. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. It was not from Alistair, it was from his sister. Mrs. Helena Vane, she had married a clergyman, and kept her maiden name in everything but law, wrote to say she was staying at Crestmore for a fortnight, and would be very glad of Lady Ashford's company at tea on Thursday, if Lady Ashford could be persuaded to make the 4 miles. Leonora read it twice, then wrote back accepting. She told herself she was accepting because Helena Vane was pleasant company, and had nothing to do with any of it. She dressed in a morning gown of dove grey, not the riding habit, not deliberately anything, and was handed into her carriage by a groom who had learned in 6 years, not to comment on the Countess's decisions. Cresmo was large in the way of houses that have had 2 centuries to accumulate consequence. The drive was straight and well kept. The entrance hall was pale stone and correct. Everything was correct. The flowers fresh and arranged without personality, the rugs fine and showing no sign of use. The house felt maintained rather than lived in. Helena met her in the drawing room and was immediately a relief. She was 2 years younger than Alistair and resembled him only in the directness of her eyes, the same quality of attention, deployed with considerably more warmth. She poured tea with brisk competence and asked about the eastern field drainage with genuine interest, and Leonora found herself within 10 minutes comfortable. "He told me about the French drains," Helena said, "and the geological survey and Grimshaw." A small pause. "He told me rather a lot about you over the summer." "Did he?" "He described your approach to estate management as unusually rigorous for the situation." Helena's expression was serene. "From Alistair, that is substantial praise." "And from you?" "From me it sounds like a man who cannot stop thinking about a woman and has only one vocabulary available." She said this with the composure of someone who has known a person their entire life and lost the capacity for tact about them. "He is not easy." "No," Leonora agreed. "He was not always like this before—" Helena stopped. "You know the broad shape of it." His wife, Arabella, she was charming. She was also very young and he was very rigid, and the combination was not good. When she chose to make her unhappiness public rather than private, he— a pause. "Closed. Very thoroughly. And has remained closed, to my persistent frustration, for 7 years." Leonora looked at the flowers on the mantelpiece, fresh without personality. "What would you like me to do with this information, Mrs. Vane?" Helena looked at her directly. "I would like you to know that when he is insufferable there is a reason, and when he is less insufferable—" A pause. "There is also a reason." She picked up her teacup. "He asked me whether I thought he had behaved well toward you. He asks me that sort of thing when he is not sure." "And what did you tell him?" "That it was a question he should address to you." She smiled. "More tea." Alistair was in the corridor outside the drawing room when Leonora left. He had not been waiting. He had evidently been waiting. He turned when she came out and looked at her with the contained expression she knew as his working state, managing something, holding something, not yet certain what to do with it. "Lady Ashford." A pause. "I didn't know Helena had written." "She told me." Leonora stopped. "She said you didn't." "I didn't." "Ah." The corridor was long and pale, with a window at the far end letting in November grey. Between them was the particular distance of 2 people who have had a library conversation that neither has recovered from. "She means well," he said. "She does." Leonora looked at him. "She told me about Arabella, nothing I didn't already know, the broad shape, the manner of it." A pause. "She said you are not always as you are." "That is—" He stopped. "I know," she said. "It is a strange thing to be told." He looked at the window at the end of the corridor. "I behaved badly in the Merivale's library." "You behaved honestly. I found it preferable to the other version." "I left." "You did." "I am not." He stopped again. She watched him arrive at the edge of something and this time stay there rather than retreat. "I am not good at not knowing what to do." "That," she said, "is the most self-aware thing you have said to me." His eyes met hers. "Leonora," he said. Her name, just that, without title, without form, the word with nothing around it. She did not move. She was aware of the wing pin at her collar and her gloves in her hands. She had taken them off in the drawing room and had not put them back on, and the November light, and the complete stillness of the house around them. "I should go," she said. She did not move. "Yes," he said. He did not move either. "The road back—" "Yes." She looked at him. He looked at her. All of it was there in the looking. The field boundary and the letter and the cider at the fair and the library and all the days between, everything accumulated without permission. "I do not want to damage anything of yours," he said quietly. "That is the last thing I want." "I know," she said. "But I find that—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. He tried again. "I find that I am not able to, that what I intend and what I—" Another stop. "This is not the letter." "No," she said. "The letter was better." "I'll write you another." "Don't," she said. "Say it." A pause. "I would like to call on you," he said. "Not at parties, not by circumstance, properly, if you would permit it." The corridor was quiet. "My reputation," she began. "I know." "Lady Dowell." "I know." His voice was steady. "I know all of it. I am asking anyway." She looked at him for a long moment. "You will be discussed," she said. "People will say things about you again, as they did before." "Yes." "And about me, things that are—" "Yes." He held her gaze. "I know what it costs. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise." She looked down at the gloves in her hands, then up at him. "Call on Thursday," she said. "At 11. Mrs. Baines will be present." He nodded once. She left. The carriage ride home was 4 miles, and she spent none of it thinking about the field drainage. He called on Thursday at 11, with Mrs. Baines present in the adjoining room and the door between left open, at the precise angle that propriety required. He sat in the south-facing room, and they talked, about the estate first, then about other things. He had opinions about farming that were practical and unsentimental. She had views on London politics that were informed and undeferred. He had read widely, in the focused way of a man who reads to understand rather than to display. She disagreed with him on 3 subjects, and found each time that he engaged with the disagreement rather than managing it. On the 4th visit, she brought out the field boundary dispute and laid the correspondence on the desk between them, and he spent an hour on it and identified a surveying inconsistency in the 1804 documents that her solicitor in London had missed. "I'll write to my own solicitor," he said. "He's handled 3 similar disputes. He'll know the applicable precedent." "You don't need to—" "I know." He looked at the map. "I want to." She let him. On the 5th visit, he arrived from a wet morning, and Mrs. Baines brought tea without being asked, and Leonora watched him settle by the fire with the ease of a man who was no longer managing the space, and understood that something had changed in the visits without her noticing precisely when. The calls were not a secret. Nothing in a county this size was a secret. Mrs. Baines's presence satisfied the letter of propriety, not its spirit, and everyone understood the difference. By the 3rd week of November, the story had been revised into several forms. Lady Dowell's version held that the Countess was being reckless, that a duke calling repeatedly on a single woman, chaperone or no, meant one thing, and if that thing did not end in a church, then the Countess would have been very foolish indeed. The version among the younger set held that it was rather romantic. Mrs. Partridge's version was that she simply hoped no one would be hurt. What reached Leonora was Mrs. Partridge's version, via Charlotte, delivered with the faithful anxiety of someone who loves the people involved and can see the various ways this could end. "No one thinks badly of you specifically," Charlotte said carefully. "It's more they don't understand what it is, and when people don't understand a thing, they fill the space with what they expect," Leonora finished. What reached Alistair was Lady Dowell's version, via Sir Robert Finch, on a wet Thursday morning over the drainage inspection, delivered in the careful manner of a man who knows he is in delicate territory. "She says your intentions aren't—" Finch stopped. "She implies, in short, that you don't mean marriage." Alistair looked at Finch's clay field for a moment. "Does she?" he said. "I told her it was none of her business." "Thank you, Robert." He rode home in the rain and sat in his library for an hour. The library at Crestmore was large and considerably less used than the one at Ashford Park. The books were ordered by subject and had not been rearranged in years. There was nothing on the desk. He thought about what he meant. He thought about it with the precision he applied to everything, examining it from the side, from underneath, checking for cracks. He thought about Arabella, charming, young, and managed rather than loved. He thought about the 7 years of correctness that followed, and how little they had produced. He thought about a south-facing room with reading glasses on the desk and a woman who had let him look at her field boundary maps as if this were a normal thing to share. He thought about the way she had said Alistair in the corridor at Crestmore. Just that. He sat another half hour. Then he called for his horse. Leonora was in the eastern field when he arrived, not at the house but in the field itself, walking the line of the second drainage trench with Grimshaw and Calloway, her boots appropriately ruined for it, her old green riding habit on, because she had been riding earlier and simply continued. The drizzle had become earnest. The groom brought word that the Duke of Crestmore was at the house. She thanked him, finished the point she was making to Calloway about the depth of the second trench, and walked back through the wet grass. She was not presentable. She knew she was not presentable. She went in. He was in the entrance hall rather than the sitting room. He had not sat. He turned when she came in. Her hem was muddy. Her hair had done what hair does in November rain. She was holding her gloves in one hand because she had needed both hands in the field and had not replaced them. "I should change," she said. "Please don't," he said. She stopped. He looked at her with the expression she had not been able to name, and that she now understood was simply him, without the management, without the composure that was a daily choice, looking at her. "I have been told what Lady Dowell is saying," he said. "As have I. I want to," he paused, tried again. "I owe you clarity about what I intend." She looked at him, standing in her entrance hall in his good coat, damp at the shoulders from the drizzle, with the expression of a man who has sat in his library and arrived at something. "Alistair," she said. He looked at her. "What do you intend?" she asked. A pause. Then plainly, without ornamentation, "You permanently, if you'll have it." The entrance hall was quiet. From somewhere in the house, a clock. She looked at him for a long moment. "That," she said, "is considerably plainer than the letter. I told you the letter was not my best work." "No." She looked down at the gloves in her hand, then up. "My independence is yours," he said. "I'm not asking you to become someone else. My title, my estate, my decisions are yours." He held her gaze. "I made a marriage once where I thought the order of things mattered more than the person inside them. I know what that produces." A pause. "I am not the man I was then, or I am trying not to be. You are." He stopped. "You are the reason I am trying." The drizzle was rain now, loud at the windows. "Lady Dowell," she said. "We'll talk regardless," he said. "Let her have something accurate to say." She looked at him. "You are going to find me difficult," she said. "I know. I am not going to change how I manage the estate, or how I ride, or what I wear to a ball when my carriage has lost a wheel. I know. Very quiet. I would not want you to. You said otherwise to Finch at the ball." He was still for a moment. "I was wrong about what I said to Finch. I have been wrong about several things." He looked at her steadily. "I am right about this." The rain at the windows, the clock from another room, the muddy hem of her riding habit and his damp shoulders, and the wing pin at her collar catching the grey November light. "Yes," she said. He looked at her as though he'd misheard. "Yes," she said again, "I'll have it." They were engaged by the end of November, which gave Lady Dowell 6 weeks of extraordinary material before Christmas. The announcement was made first to Helena, who received it with profound relief, and the remark that it had taken long enough. Calloway was told by Leonora, who informed him without ceremony that the Duke would be at Ashford Park with some regularity, and was not to be treated as a guest requiring management. Grimshaw finished the second drainage trench the same week and sent a note saying the eastern field should give no further trouble. The engagement was unconventional by the standards of such things. Leonora declined to remove to Crestmoor before the wedding. She had an estate to run and a boundary dispute to resolve, and no intention of creating the impression that she required moving anywhere. Alistair came to Ashford Park 3 times a week. Mrs. Baines was no longer stationed in the adjoining room, which the county noted, though the county had already said everything it had to say on the subject and was running out of steam. Lady Dowell revised her position with the speed of a woman who understood that the story had changed. A duchess, which Leonora would be, was a different figure than a countess being reckless. The rank, as always, rearranged things. Charlotte Merivale said she had known from the dinner and would have appreciated credit. Mrs. Partridge observed that everyone appeared unhurt and readjusted her hopes to satisfaction. The wedding was set for March. The boundary dispute was resolved in January by the application of Alistair's solicitor and the surveying inconsistency he had found in the 1804 documents. Leonora received the settlement on a Tuesday and wrote to her own solicitor in London with precise satisfaction. She told Alistair that evening. He was in the sitting room when she came in, not behind the desk which was hers, but in the chair by the fire where he had established himself over 3 months with the gradual confidence of a man who has been allowed to stay. He was reading. She had not expected this when she opened the door, and the unexpectedness of it did something she didn't examine. "We won," she said. He looked up. "The boundary dispute?" "The full 11 acres. Your man's argument about the survey reference was correct." "Good." He set the book down. "That's good." He looked at her with the look she had a name for now, had had one since the corridor at Crestmore, since she had said Alistair, and he had said her name back with everything in it. "You should be pleased," he said. "I am." She sat across from him. "I am also—" She paused. "What?" She looked at the fire. "I am going to miss it." "The dispute?" "The desk," she said. "This room. The particular quality of—" She stopped. "I know it's mine to keep. I know we've arranged it. I know I will continue to sit at that desk and argue with Calloway about wool prices." She looked at the desk, with its ledgers and its reading glasses. "I have been very happy here alone." "Yes," he said. "And I am happy with you here also." She looked at him squarely. "Both things are true." He was quiet a moment. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to choose between them." "I know you aren't." She looked at the fire again. "I am telling you because you should know all of it." The fire settled. The January dark pressed at the windows. She had her gloves off, she always had them off in this room, had stopped noticing when she'd started doing that, and she was looking at the fire with the profile he knew now as well as any room he had ever lived in. He crossed the distance between them and sat beside her. "I was happiest," he said, "at the fair." "No, the first time in this room, the reading glasses on the desk." He paused. "No, the corridor at Crestmore, after Helena's tea." She turned to look at him. "You are listing occasions." "I'm finding it difficult to stop." Almost a smile. "The library at the Merivales, the entrance hall with the mud on your hem, the boundary wall when I had no excuse to be there and no better one to invent." He looked at her. "Every time has been its own occasion." "Alistair," she said. "You are going to make me—" She stopped. "What?" "Sentimental," she said with some indignation. He smiled then, properly, a real thing, without management, without composure performing itself. She had seen it twice before, and it still caught her. "Good," he said. She looked at him for a moment with the grey eyes that had been assessing him since the ball at Ashwick, and were assessing him still. Then she leaned forward and kissed him. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was the kind that belongs to people who have arrived somewhere after a long journey, certain, quiet, a recognition. He put one hand against her jaw, and she kept hers folded in her lap for exactly 3 seconds before deciding that dignity had been sufficiently served and putting them where she wanted them, which was not in her lap, and the fire was warm, and the January dark was at the windows. And outside somewhere the eastern field drained as it was supposed to, and the boundary was settled, and the wingpin was at her collar, and she was in her own south-facing room. When she drew back, she looked at him with an expression that was neither composed nor unguarded, but something she had not had before him, both at once, in the same face. "March," she said. "March," he agreed. He was still smiling. She found this affected her considerably. She picked up his book to see what he'd been reading. "Agricultural essays," she said. "You mentioned them, in the Merton Library, months ago." He looked entirely unrepentant. "I went back for them." She looked at the book, then at him. Then, because she was the Countess of Ashford and had spent 31 years being precise about things, she put the book back in his hands and kept her own in her lap, and looked at the fire with the expression of a woman who has decided and is at peace with the decision, and requires nothing further from the evening. The fire, the room, the reading glasses on the desk. Outside the cold was considerable, and the night was long, and the county would be talking until spring. They stayed where they were.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, or at least leave a comment. Thanks for watching.